I'm a social scientist, and people tell me twice a week that they despair from trying to reach out to people on the other side of the political and ideological divide. They think that whoever the other side is, if it's left or the right, they are beyond reach. They are deplorable or uneducated or fanatical. And basically, they accept this very bitter division which plagues our country. And I did a study to show that this conventional wisdom is mistaken. We can reach profound shared understandings. So I did a study of something I call moral dialogues. It's actually an odd thing. Most of us think that when it comes to the question of what's right or wrong, we can have a conversation like this around a dinner table, maybe with the extended family, so they're even there. We already expect trouble. But the notion that the nation, 330 million people, can have a conversation, that sounds odd, but it's happening every day. Just to give an example, we now have a national conversation following the killing of George Floyd, how we should reimagine policing. That is a moral conversation. We have a moral conversation about Black Lives Matters. We have another conversation, a newer conversation, about what role should we give to the government? Should the government provide a lot of social services the way they do in Europe, or should it focus on security and a much more limited government? We had a decade-long debate about abortions. Now, people usually think about these debates as if they're screaming matches and people shout at each other and argue, but nothing happens. But let me give you some examples, and you see how these moral dialogues, while they are intensive, while they are passionate, in the end lead to profound shared moral understandings. Take, for example, what happened in 1996. In 1996, President Clinton signed a bill in defense of the family. And the bill said that a marriage has to be between a man and a woman. This was a liberal democratic president. 19 years later, the conservative Roberts Cole ruled that gay marriages of people of the same gender are legal. For 19 years, we moved to a majority which was deadly opposed to gay marriages, to a conservative court approving gay marriages, and so does the majority of the public. You see, here's an example over 19 years how intensive moral dialogue led to a profound change in moral understandings. If you go back until in the 1950s, nobody was concerned about the environment. People were dropping things out of the windows of the cars or into the rivers and lakes without any concern. Then came Rachel Carlson, and she wrote a book called Silent Spring, and it started a huge conversation, what we owe Mother Earth. Now, there are still disagreements about how much we should do about the environment, how exactly we should treat the environment. But the question that we have an obligation to the environment, very, very few people question is this. The civil rights movement triggered an enormous debate and it led to desegregation and such. The Me Too movement had a very intensive debate over the last years about sexual abuse and sexual harassment. We still argue exactly where is the line, but the overwhelming majority of us agree that people in power should not use their power to force people in the office to have sex with them, and so on and so on. So I took many such examples of moral dialogues, and it turns out, interestingly, they all have the same history, the same so-called natural history. Partly all of them start with a profound statement, right? Rachel Carson about the environment, or Betty Friedan's 1963 book about feminism, which started the feminist movement, or Martin Luther King's speeches, which were a cornerstone of the civil rights movement. So they start with a statement of the cause. And then there comes dramatization. Why? Because in order to trigger a moral conversation in a big, complicated nation, we need to visualize it. So, for instance, the surrogate tied themselves to the chains of the British Parliament in their call for women's right to vote. The civil rights movement started with a sit-in, and so on and so on. So all these movements went from a brief to dramatization to intensive dialogue, people talking to each other in carpools, over dinner table, on radio call-in shows, and then slowly the dust does settle 9 times out of 10. The end is not some kind of a mere consensus. It's translated into people changing their behavior, like recycling, like being much more careful the way they use the N-word, and so, and to legislation. So just give one example. President Nixon, a conservative, founded the Environmental Protection Agency. He was the first to introduce environmental laws because the consensus was so strong. So, yes, we can reach shared moral understandings across the board. They lead not only to consensus, but to change behavior and to change legislation. The detail of all this you'll find in a book I published recently called Reclaiming Patriotism. And the good news is, because I wanted people to read it, so I gave up on the royalties. I made it open source, so you can download it without any charge. I loved for you to have a look at how moral dialogues work, how you can contribute to make them happen. And I'd love to hear from you about them. Send me a message, post your message on civildialogues.org. Thank you very much.